Hello everyone and welcome to the latest edition of the Royal Blue podcast as we pick the bones out of Everton's Premier League opener, the 1-0 home defeat to Fulham, and we've got another signing to talk about as well. We're back here at the ECHO office in the heart of Liverpool City Centre. I'm Chris Beesley, ECHO Everton reporter, joined by Echo's Everton correspondent Joe Thomas and our colleague Connor O'Neil as well. And if we start, Joe, we had Sunday, I suppose, a day of rest after that game and more transfer ups and downs, but it is another signing over the line for Everton in the shape of Jack Harrison.
Absolutely, and things never seem to be particularly easy when Everton come to the fore, do they? Obviously it was yourself who was in yesterday trying to work out what on earth was going on with the Jack Harrison deal. I think ultimately we can probably skip over a lot of the ins and outs and just finish off with the important bit, and that is that he is now a Blue. Season-long loan from Leeds United, still injured, out for the next few weeks, of course. Obviously, we understand there was a bit of interest from Aston Villa. They were another club that were interested throughout the summer, but I think his injury issue was enough to put them off, given that they need immediate cover for Emiliano Buendia's ACL injury, which I think is one of the big issues there. But ultimately, he's an Everton player, passed his medical on Sunday. I think it was common knowledge by the end of it that he had a medical with the Blues yesterday, and then final bits and pieces of paperwork concluded on Monday morning, so it wasn't a done deal, signed off, completely done until an hour or two ago. We're speaking just before 11 o'clock on Monday morning, but he's in. Fourth summer signing, another attacking addition, and I think it's a positive Premier League experience. I was looking at his stats, and he's got 21 goals and 16 assists and 107 Premier League appearances. I mean, that's quite a good record, really. That's a goal involvement, one in every 3 games, which would be a significant improvement on a lot of what Everton have got to muster at the moment. Clearly, the main priority for Everton before this signing and after this signing remains a striker, someone to fill that gap between the kind of the youth and the potential of Chermiti and the ability that we know that Dominic Calvert-Lewin has but can't always get onto the pitch because of his injury issues, or we can't gamble on him being on that pitch for 35 games of this season and more. So that work remains ongoing, and I think it would be foolish to judge off a proper judgment on the transfer window until the end of it, because that is an issue that needs to be addressed. But Harrison, the fourth summer signing, and the next step on the way to, it feels like we're heading towards a positive transfer window. Still work to be done. And another important caveat is Everton couldn't have afforded to stand still. Lost a lot of players through natural expiration of contracts. Obviously, some offered new deals and turned them down. Others decided to go, or the club decided that they didn't want to renew their services. So Everton needed to make signings just to keep pace with everybody else before they even think about surpassing other teams and getting up to the lofty heights of 16th, 15th, 14th in the table. But it feels like it's another step forward and a step towards what looks like it has the potential to become a positive transfer window. Yeah.
Connor, late interest from Aston Villa, but in the end they didn't fancy it. But as Joe has mentioned there, Jack Harrison currently nursing an injury. Do you think Evertonians should be excited by the signing?
Yeah, I think it's a positive sign. I think it's an area in which Everton, we've spoke at length about Everton's need for improvement in that area, and it's someone who ticks a lot of boxes in terms of productivity, goals, assists. He's a hard-working winger. I think anyone who plays out wide for the Marcelo Bielsa team has to work hard, and it's pretty similar to Sean Dyche, isn't it? That they have to work hard and put a real shift in, and he's someone who does that, and they should be excited. I think the only disappointing side is, like you say, he is injured, and it'll be I think a few weeks before we even get a first glimpse of him being in contention for a starting place. But yeah, it's a positive one. It's a step in the right direction, and the hope now is that this leads to more incomings over the next 2 weeks or so, because I'm sure we'll get onto it, there's still gaps in the squad that need filling, and also there's probably players who are in the club still who'll be moved on. I think Kevin Fowler even alluded to that himself, didn't he, in his open letter on the programme on Saturday, that there are players at the club who will be moved on, and who are surplus to requirements. But yeah, I think it's a positive sign. I think it's a proven Premier League play, which is important for Everton, because I think we've spoken at length, haven't we, about they need players to come in and hit the ground running when they do come in, because Everton haven't really got time to blood young people, to blood young players in, to blood players who perhaps never played in the Premier League before. They need people to come in and hit the ground running, and he's hopefully someone who will do that and someone who will add that extra bit of dimension that Sean Dyche and Everton desperately need.
Yeah, and obviously the signing came after Everton's first Premier League game of the season. All three of us were there at Goodison Park the weekend. I suppose it was a strange one, Joe, in that people who weren't at that game, they maybe think, oh, well, Everton played a certain way, maybe laboured, struggled to create chances. It was anything but, wasn't it? They unfortunately spurned a number of golden opportunities. I mean, should we take encouragement from that, or does it just make that defeat even more painful in the short term?
It's a painful defeat. There's no doubt about that. The margins were very, very fine last season. Obviously, Everton went all the way through to the last kick of the last game of the season before their survival was confirmed, and it was clearly a close run thing the season before as well. So when the margins are that tight, you can't afford to waste opportunities to get points on the board, and clearly Everton did do that on Saturday. They did do that through a little bit of bad luck, but also through issues that are long-standing and haven't been addressed for a couple of transfer windows now. However, I think there are a lot of positives to take from that performance and from what it says about Sean Dyche and the setup at Everton and the wider state of affairs at Finch Farm, on the footballing side at the very least. 19 shots, 9 on target. You go in at half time, and there was, if you were to look at the possession stats, obviously it would look as if Fulham had dominated, but really it was the other way around. Yeah. Sean Dyche is someone that doesn't put all of his emphasis and opinions down to statistics, but he does have an appreciation of them. And whilst different people have different views on this, the XG, the expected goals, well, Everton should have scored at least 2 at half time, and Fulham's XG was 0.02, which is really, really comprehensive. That's as dominant a performance you can get. I think in many ways that first half was the perfect Sean Dyche template. Not very much possession, but they didn't concede possession in areas that offered any real threat or danger to Jordan Pickford's goals. And everything that Everton did when they did have the ball was effective. They were direct, but they did get into the opposition box. They did create chances, and they created good chances. Obviously, they missed them, and that is a concern. And I think we'll all agree that's a concern that needs to be addressed for this transfer window to be viewed as a positive one. But ultimately, I think when that team sheet dropped at 2:00 on Saturday, obviously a little bit earlier. We have access to it a little bit earlier, but held by the embargoes that are in place around the Premier League before we report it. I can understand why there would have been a sense of deflation around Goodison Park, because you look at that, and once again, despite all the work that's been done in the transfer window, despite all the work that's being done at Finch Farm, rehabilitation to injuries, again, no Arno Danjuma in the starting lineup, no Dominic Calvert-Lewin in the starting lineup. You've got Alex Iwobi playing out of position, you've got James Garner playing out of position, and there are other areas that people have strong feelings on as well. For what was essentially a makeshift side cobbled together from a threadbare squad that's hit by injuries, to get that 11 into a position where they were so dominant from the first 45, 50, 55 minutes of a game against what was a mid-table Premier League opposition last season. That's actually quite impressive. And I think that Dyche deserves a degree of credit from that, because you think, well, there isn't really more that he could have done. We'll probably come on to starting lineup in terms of the absences of Calvert-Lewin and things like that in a little bit. But if we take everything at face value and say those players weren't selected because they genuinely weren't available, which is what Dyche obviously says, and there's no reason to disbelieve him on those fronts, then actually it's quite impressive that what is probably one of the weakest sides that Everton will end up putting out this season, you would think once players come back from injuries and the new signings gel in, was actually so competitive. That doesn't mean to say there's not any problems. Of course there is, and obviously the fact that Everton didn't take the chances has hurt them, and that's something that's been an issue for 2 seasons and will continue to be an issue this season unless those problems are addressed. But ultimately, there is there's an alternative universe where a very, very few tweaks are needed for Everton to be coming off at half time in that game, with the game pretty much wrapped up, Goodison Park bouncing, Amadou Onana with 2 assists, and 2 of the probably more maligned squad players, Neal Maupay and Michael Keane, both having hit the back of the net and already got their accounts open for the new season. that wasn't the case, and that remains an issue. Everton aren't going to survive on what ifs and nearlies. Yeah. But there are positives to take from that, and I do think it would be, a shame to kind of come away from that and look only at the final score when we come to our judgments on it.
Yeah, well, a few weeks back, I think the Royal Blue podcast was crawl into military history territory. I'm not going to go into advanced physics with Joe and start talking about multiverses and things like that. But Connor, what I will say, I'll keep things a lot more simple for you. Yeah, Sean Dyche.
Please do.
Yeah, we won't be going down. I know Oppenheimer's out at the moment, but we won't be going down that road. Sean Dyche talks about the bliss to miss, but I mean, didn't feel very, very blissful, did it, with all those spurned opportunities at the weekend that Joe speaks about?
I mean, it was incredible, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, the chances, they were so clear cut. That was the big thing for me, was they were so clear cut. You think of like Maupay's one in the opening minute where he drags a shot wide, which was a little bit difficult because it was an acute angle and stuff, but you're thinking, well, that's, in Everton's book, that's a good chance because they don't create. But then they go on to create 4 or 5 really clear-cut chances, and Decore should burst the net, Maupay should burst the net. It was just, it was hard to watch because you know what's coming. If that makes sense,
an inevitability.
And I actually think we thought Everton got away with it when Jimenez hits the post, and a couple of minutes later, unfortunately, Jordan Pickford's picking the ball at the back of the net. But yeah, it was so tough to take on Saturday because I actually thought it was probably the best Goodison performance since the 3-0 win over Crystal Palace last season.
Yeah, in terms of a performance,
in terms of domination, being at it, everything gelling, everything looking right. And I thought, when you look at it now, there's a lot of positives to take, but ultimately they got beat. Yeah. And Everton, have already lost ground, you could argue, in the Premier League. Yeah. But yeah, it was a strange afternoon because they could have easily been 4-0 up, and I just think even Patterson's chance where he hits the bar, and it's almost harder to hit the bar than not put it in the back of the net, and that's another one that goes begging. Tarkowski's header at the end where it just rolls the wrong side of the post, and I spoke to James Tarkowski after the game, and he almost was a bit speechless in how Everton hadn't come away with at least a point. Yeah. But one thing he did say was that he said we've probably created more chances this afternoon than we have in a game in all my time at the club, and when you look back, it probably is correct. And that's, like Joe says, that's got to be the blueprint now. That first sort of 45 minutes has got to be the blueprint, and you would hope that with that blueprint and a few additional tweaks to the starting lineup, a bit of quality added in some parts of the pitch, it will all come together for Everton and Sean Dyche, because there certainly signs of real positivity there. If only they could put the ball in the back of the net. But it feels like we've been saying that for about 2.5 years now. Yeah.
Just quickly, I'll say about which of all those chances was actually the best chance that they should have scored. I'll start. If I'll say, I think that Nathan Patterson's, I think he should have scored about the U2.
I know what you're saying, but I think Decore.
Yeah, I agree with Decore. Yeah, I think, obviously Maupay had good chances. But that one, Decore had so much time and space, and the keeper was to an extent committed as well. Just imagine Goodison Park if that had gone in after 5 minutes.
Yeah, so. Yeah, you're going to go for it, but going to go Decore, right? We talked about those missed chances, but there was, of course, Everton did get the ball in the back of the net. Unfortunately, Michael Keane's shot came a second after the referee's whistle was blown. So, what was your take on all of that one, Joe?
I think it was a real shame. I can understand Sean Dyche's frustration. I think it's probably less an issue for VAR and more an issue for Stuart Atwell, the referee. Looks as if he probably blew his whistle before the ball was in the back of the net, which then creates problems. I mean, we see so much of last season, this idea of letting play run its course and then making a decision once everything's reached its conclusion. And unfortunately, in this case, that wasn't allowed to happen, and that had a serious impact for Everton, because had that passage of play been allowed to conclude without Atwell's intervention, well, no one's stopping the ball from getting in the back of the net. There's no defender that didn't block it because they gave up trying because the whistle had gone. That isn't the case in this. And I think when you look at what happened, obviously, Bernd Leno goes down as man of the match, and he kept a clean sheet, and I think he had 12 points on the fantasy Premier League football. It looks like a dream performance from him, but really it should have been a really costly error for his team, that, because like Dyche says, Tarkowski does absolutely nothing wrong. There's probably an element of, when he drops the ball, he drops it onto Tarkowski's arm, and then it bounces into Keane's path, and Tarkowski does nothing. That shouldn't be enough to then disallow it if everything goes and it goes to VAR. But we know how fickle and mysterious the interpretations of the handball law seem to be. So you can rule out that wouldn't have come back to haunt Everton. But for all that we talk about missed opportunities, Everton had the other issue where they did have the ball in the back of the net, and they were unfortunately cost a goal by what was a mistake on the pitch, I think.
Yeah, I mean, Connor, for me, it was almost like going back to Per Luigi Collina, the phantom foul that denied Everton and against Villarreal. I guess the problem, as Joe spoke about there, is the referee being too quick with the whistle, because it seems an absolute nonsense that on one hand we have all these offsides where play goes on and we're offside, but we carry it on and then the flag goes up. Whereas now, because the referee's blown the whistle quick, we can't go to VAR. It just seems like the law's an ass.
Yeah, it's shambolic, isn't it? Yeah. There's just no other way to describe it. I must admit, when it first happened in the ground, I was a bit confused as to what has actually gone on. It was only afterwards when you kind of got the full picture that he blew for a foul because there was a suggestion of handball, wasn't he? And there was a few other bits going on, and then it became clear that because he blew his whistle before the ball got into the back of the net. And again, speaking to James Tarkowski after the game, I think he perfectly summed up in the sense of, he said the referee was the only person inside Goodison Park who thought that was a foul. Yeah. He's the only person who basically...
Dyche even said he reckoned the Fulham bench weren't complaining much.
I mean, I spoke to, I also asked Marco Silva about the post-match, and he was very coy and shot back with a penalty appeal at his side, but give a wee smile which presented, which suggested that he thought his side had got away with one as well. And again, it's a decision that changes the course of the game, because if Everton, by that point they could have been 3-0 up. But if they get that goal and it goes in, they're still going in half-time 1-0 up. They're still going up with the tails up. The crowd's going to be up. And all of a sudden, that second half, the emphasis is on Fulham then taking the game to Everton and breaking, Sean Dyche's side down. Instead, it wasn't. And I think, it just kind of summed up a real frustrating afternoon in terms of, everything that kind of could go wrong did go wrong. But, yeah, I mean, we always talk about VAR, don't we? And I think it's just the whole rules and the way things are shambolic, aren't they? And, at the end of the day, we're in a position now where you can't win either way, because the referee, like we said there, offsides, the referee plays on, or the line, even though the lines are stood, just flag up, play on, because they might go back to VAR to check. Yeah. But then they, whistle there. You think, well, even when the ball drops, there's only one thing that's going to happen, and that's Michael Keane putting it in the back of the net. There's no phases to play that are going to come. So why didn't you just let the game go for 15 more seconds, and then
even like half a second or something?
A proper judgment could have been made then. We could be sitting here now and Everton. That's the first goal on Everton's way to victory. But yeah, it was a shambolic call, and I know people will be quick to question Sean Dyche and say, well, if your side could has shooting boots on, you weren't moaning about VAR and stuff like that, which is understandable. But I think the Everton manager had every right to be angry with the way things had transpired there, because his side was certainly robbed of a legitimate goal. Yeah, I mean, Connor's right there. If Everton had put their chances away, it would have been a moot point. But obviously at this level, the margins are so tight, as you say, Joe, and these games are typically decided by just a single goal. Going back to what you said about the starting lineup, I mean, a lot of people have said that there was a sense of almost deflation when that team sheet dropped, and the people were concerned about where the goals were going to come from even before a ball had been kicked. I mean, your thoughts, obviously, Sean Dyche has been adamant, hasn't he, that Dominic Calvert-Lewin has got to complete his rehabilitation programme, but he has a couple of 45 minutes run-outs in recent times. Similar story with Arnaud Danjuma. I mean, he didn't think he had enough fitness in him to go for longer than he did, but a lot of Evertonians in the stands there are just concerned about why ever in a position when they can't field these players on the opening day again.
Yeah, I can understand the concern to some extent. Obviously, we have some insight to what's going on at Finch Farm, but we don't know what the data's saying. We don't know what Dominic Calvert-Lewin's stats are saying, what he's saying, how his progress is going. Obviously, they have some of the best medics in the world in sporting medics in the world. They're analysing everything. Asked the club after the team news was announced with Dominic Calvert-Lewin whether or not he had a setback, and then they said no setback. It's just a continuation of his rehabilitation regime, and of course that's fair enough. But where I'm slightly where I can understand some of the frustration maybe is that obviously a fortnight before the game, Dominic Calvert-Lewin's played 45 minutes twice in a week, and then he's had a week off. And if there's been no setback, you wonder why he might not have been deemed good enough, fit enough to have then done a job for 45 minutes or 30 minutes or 20 minutes against Fulham, all of which you would think that had he been able to do so, well, for all the reasons we've discussed, it may well be that Everton would have got something from that game. And it's an interesting one because I don't think that we can question Sean Dyche's approach to Dominic Calvert-Lewin and his fitness, because I think he's got everything right so far. Ultimately, as tight as last season was, Everton got into a situation where they were as cautious as they could and as fair as they were to Dominic Calvert-Lewin, and he's openly expressed his happiness with how he's been looked after by Dyche, his coaching team, and treated by them. And as tight as it was, Everton stayed up. And obviously they've got through all of this summer, and they've got themselves in a situation where they were more than competitive, arguably dominant for most of the game on Saturday without him. So there's clearly progress around it, which is helping to reduce the burden and the pressure on Dominic Calvert-Lewin's shoulders. Where I'm just a little bit confused is probably the right word. Is for all that Everton were very good for that first 45, 50 minutes, and for all that there's a general acceptance both within the club and outside it that Everton probably need another striker to ease the pressure on Dominic Calvert-Lewin, so there isn't so much talk around every game about when he's involved and how long he's involved for. The big issue that Everton are probably still working on addressing, aside from the striker, is the depth of their squad. Obviously Jack Harrison helps that. But we're going to see increasingly this season, we saw it last season, it was almost entirely to Everton's detriment, the fact that games are now split into, it's not just 90 minutes anymore. The number of substitutes that you can now make mean that most Premier League clubs around the 60th, 70th minutes mark refresh about a third of their starting lineup, and they tend to refresh that with genuine quality that's close, if not the same as their starting lineup. We saw so many teams do that against Everton last season and finish the second half so much stronger. You look at Nottingham Forest when they came back into that game in Nottingham and got the equaliser. You look at Wolves on Boxing Day even before they made any substitutes. And you look at Everton, say Leicester when they drew, and you just thought that game was there for the taking in the last 10 minutes, yet the only substitute that Sean Dyche made was the one for Coleman coming off because of his injury. You even look at Bournemouth last day of the season when Bournemouth had chances at the end of that, not clear-cut chances, but they did push for a goal. In that game, Everton only made one substitute. These are all kind of issues that Everton are going to have to deal with, because we saw it again against Fulham on Saturday, this idea that, okay, Everton, you almost feel like Everton, with the thinness of their squad, they almost need to win games in the first hour and then be competitive for the second half an hour, 40 minutes if we see these 10 minutes of stoppage times added on, which is obviously a big step away from where they were. If they're not winning that first hour, it's unlikely they're going to win the second half hour. And we saw that play out exactly. When that team news dropped at 2 o'clock and we saw that Pereira, Mitrovic, likes of those were on the bench for Fulham, the obvious narrative that we were all sitting there was thinking, Everton competitive for a while, and then the substitutes changed this game because look at their bench compared to Everton's, and that is exactly what happened. Fulham made 3 substitutes, they all combined for the goal in the 73rd minute, and after that, it was a different story. And when you look at how those games are boiled down, you think, well, it doesn't have to be that Dominic Calvert-Lewin's ready for 90 minutes. It doesn't even necessarily have to be that he's available for an hour. Even if he's just ready for that last 20 minutes, half an hour, then that might be enough. So you kind of wonder what it would take for him to get to where he was just over a week ago, when he could play 45 minutes twice, albeit in friendlies, to where he can be in a situation where he can play those 20 minutes, half an hour, that might make a difference. Because it is important when you think about these and how you judge that risk and reward. Because if you look at where Everton are now, there are lots of positives to take. I think there are lots of positives to take despite the defeat from that opening day against Fulham. But Everton now go into a weekend where they go away to Aston Villa, which will be one of the hardest games of their season this season. A Villa side that will have a point to prove after being stuffed by Newcastle. And then there's another week after that where you get to Fulham. So Everton could play very, very well and still lose to Aston Villa at the weekend. Can't write it off, but you would go there anticipating Everton a big underdogs.
It's a tough game, yeah.
If they do lose that, they then go into a situation a week later where there will be real pressure to try and win now against Wolves, because Wolves are likely to be someone that are going to be down there in the bottom end of the table. And if they don't do that,
6-pointer in August.
and if they don't do that, all of a sudden the pressure just continues to build and build and build. So with Dominic Calvert-Lewin, and I stress, I have no idea what the data show. I'm not with the player, and I completely understand and take at face value. Trust Sean Dyche's opinions on it. He knows far more, and those around know far more than me. But if you look at it, if Dominic Calvert-Lewin could have played 20 minutes against Fulham, if he could have played the first half against Fulham, that game probably would have been out of sight. Everton got 3 points. You're then in a situation where a defeat against Villa isn't the end of the world, and a point against Wolves isn't the end of the world. You could have given Dominic Calvert-Lewin potentially 45 minutes there and rested him for a full fortnight, and then maybe not started him against Wolves because the pressure isn't on there. And you just think those fine margins, those difficult decisions. They're easy for me to talk about from the outside because I don't know what's going on and I can't pretend to know what's going on. But I can understand why a lot of fans might be thinking about those, and you do sometimes wonder whether there's an element of making it harder than it necessarily needs to be. Because just to add to all this, obviously Dominic Calvert-Lewin had been vocal on the club's own media in the week saying that he felt that he could do a job. So you can understand why these are issues that fans are mulling over in their head at 9:30, 10 o'clock on Saturday night, just before match of the day or just after, and they're thinking, you know.
I think the big thing with this is there's two different types of being fit. I think there's a being fit of what a player probably thinks they're fit and they can play at. And then there's Sean Dyche being fit. And I think Sean Dyche's belief of how fit a player is a lot different to what players and maybe supporters believe a player is fitter. And I think that's the thing with Dominic Calvert-Lewin.
He deserves to be trusted on that.
He's clearly not got to the levels that Sean Dyche believes you have to be at to be able to play. He might be at a level where he thinks he can play, but Sean Dyche has clearly got some sort of benchmark or some sort of data which shows the perfect wave of when you are at your maximum fitness levels and ability to play high level, high intensity Premier League football. And I don't think Dominic Calvert-Lewin has got to that level yet, and that's why we kind of maybe see the thing of Dom saying he feels he is fit and he can play and can would be able to contribute, and Sean Dyche holding him back and saying no, because you're not at the level that I believe you have to be at to be able to play in the Premier League. So I think this is where you see the difference in thinking and the difference in not so much a mentality thing, but the different ways and beliefs of fitness. And I think maybe a couple of years ago, some the level that Dominic Calvert-Lewin's at now would have been enough for him to play for Everton under maybe Frank Lampard or Rafa Benitez. But I think under Sean Dyche it's a different ball game, and I think he has a high level of where you need to be at to be able to play and lead the line. And I don't think Dom is anywhere near that as of yet, and that's why he's not been involved, and that's why he will continue to work behind the scenes at Finch Farm. But fans are under a right to question and wonder what's going on, because it's been a kind of a long running saga, hasn't it, with Dominic Calvert-Lewin, and when you look at the teams on Saturday, it just feels like it's never ending. There's no end in sight. I think there is an end in sight, but I think it's going to be a few more weeks yet, because, like I say, I don't think he's quite hit the levels that Sean Dyche, believes you need to be at to be able to play in the Premier League. Because Sean Dyche has been quite vocalising in the past of the intensity and the fitness levels and where you need to be. I know Burnley, a lot of the players spoke about he would always push that extra mile because he believes you've got to be able to push that extra mile to play in the Premier League. And when you look at it, he's probably right. It's the fastest paced game, probably league in world football. So I think this is just an area where two people have two different ways of thinking and are seeing it in two different ways, and ultimately the way Sean Dyche sees it and thinks is the way Everton want to follow, because he's in charge and he makes the calls.
Yeah, I mean, what Dominic Calvert-Lewin's absence from the matchday squad meant, Joe, was obviously that Neal Maupay led the line, and it's a role that we've come apparent over the past 12 months that he's anything but a like for like replacement for Dominic Calvert-Lewin. We've spoken numerous times how he does better in a pair, and the fact is, it's one goal in 30 games for him for Everton now, and a lot of that is not necessarily his fault. But whether you're playing well or playing badly, the sort of abuse that Neal Maupay suffered on social media after the game is not acceptable in anyone's book, and it's a sad indictment of the society we live in now.
Yeah, I mean, it's a sad indictment of some parts of the wider football fan base, isn't it? Just in general, not just specific to clubs, but that kind of, we see it so often on social media, that demand for everything now. Got to score this, you got to do that, you got to do that. And obviously, the club came out and condemned the abuse, and as part of that Neal Maupay shared some of that which he received, and it's absolutely not acceptable. There's no place for that. It's abhorrent, and people, they shouldn't. You can fairly say he probably should have put away some of those chances, and then don't have to go anywhere near the realms of personal abuse. That you can be fair and critical of him from a football perspective. Obviously, he also deserves some credit for being in a position where he had those chances in the first place. That is a step forward on a lot of what we have seen previously, and the fact that he was in those positions in the first place is a positive. But yeah, going into the realms of personal abuse over football football is important, but it's not life or death. And some of the messages that he received were out of order, and the fact that there are some people, and then the type of people that step in across those boundaries, they're not really football fans, are they? They're people that, I don't know, live on social media and things that I think the vast majority of football fans will appreciate that he's trying his best. And he came very, very close, like I say, in an alternative unit, albeit he didn't finish those chances, and he's paid to do that. In an alternative universe, he's coming off that pitch with a couple of goals. The margins are so fine, so fine. But the abuse that he's received is abhorrent, and there's just no need for anything like that.
He's back on his alternative universes there, Stephen Hawkins. But obviously it's a serious issue, and when we were all different ages there, and I'm the elder statesman today because Gav's not with us, and see Joe in the middle there, and you're the baby of the bunch today. But you've grown up with that more than the rest of us. I mean, it didn't exist in that sort of state when I was your age. But on a serious point, though, I mean, it's not a nice world that we even have to sort of have this. Never mind, obviously we don't accept it, but even have this within game football. I suppose at one point, you're always going to get sticky in the pub, and after the game things would be said, but I guess the way that has now manifested itself online, and it's a permanent record, and people come in and say that to your face, and well, not personally, because they wouldn't dare do that, but come to you on your social media account and say remarks like that to people, and it's just not acceptable on any level.
No, it's vile.
Yeah.
It's quite simply vile, isn't it? No one should be subject to it, and I think what you said there is the big problem for me, is because you can be faceless, and you can be behind a computer screen or a mobile phone or an iPad or a tablet and write what you want. And that's the problem, is that these people believe that they can write what they want because they don't have to put a name to it, they don't have to put a face to it. We all write for a publication, a newspaper, online. We put our name to things. We have to do that. We can't hide behind, just nothing. But these people can get away with it because there's no accountability. There's no, kind of ways in which they have to make it clear who they are. They can just set up an account and write what they want. And that's the problem. People just believe in this society that they've got the right to say what they want, and it's just so wrong. And when I seen it on Saturday night, and the first thing you just think is why does someone need to write that? Why on earth does someone think on a Saturday night or any time that I'll write that? It's just violent. But like you say, Chris, I think it's a common theme with society, modern world society, isn't it? And I think people just now believe, or got this theory in their head that they can say what they want when they want, and like I say, I think the big problem is there's no accountability behind these things, and people just because they can be on faceless accounts or make an account and say they get away with it, but they need to find a way to stop this. Not just around the Maupay and
it goes beyond football, doesn't it?
It goes beyond football. It goes. It's day-to-day life. You know what I mean? There's something that needs to be done to either make people accountable for their actions and what they're saying, because the way things stand at the minute, it's absolutely ridiculous that we live in a world that people can hide behind a screen or a mobile phone and just write vile insults like we saw Neal Maupay, unfortunately, end of on Saturday night.
And it's so poor, isn't it? Because as well, that a truer reflection of where the Everton fan base is things like the Delhi banner that was there, and from the Gladys Street.
But they're proper fans, aren't
proper
they?
Fans, they're stronger together and supporting someone that's going through a difficult time. Obviously, Delhi was there in the stadium to see that. That's where
round of applause for him as he went down the touchline into the tunnel as well.
Yeah, that's where the majority. That's where the true Blues are.
Yeah.
And that's where the true football fans are. Not people that are sending these stupid, horrible messages to players, to their personal accounts with the personal abuse. It's abhorrent.
Yeah, just finally then we'll end on a positive. Then Everton haven't got a lot of margin for error, really. It's 3 points drops. There's no doubt about that. But what is the biggest plus point you take from the game against Fulham on the weekend, Joe?
Chances that were created, I think, because I think that we spoke a lot how for Everton over the past 2 seasons you can't gamble on players avoiding injuries. You have to have a squad that's resilient enough to take. To be able to have multiple key players out at any one time. That's just the state of the Premier League. Most squads have, a core of, it's gone from a core 11, 12, 13 to a core 16, 17, 18 now. I think that was as weak in Everton starting 11 as we'll see because of the injuries and that Sean Dyche has to deal with at the minute. But despite that 11, being relying on players like Garner and Iwobi being out of position, it was still highly effective for the majority of that game, and it created a lot of chances. It created enough. Everton did enough, bar putting the ball in the back of the net, and even when they did, they were unfortunate because obviously the Stuart Atwell decision that we've discussed, they did more than enough to win that game. And I think that when you can see that perhaps the weakest 11 or one of the weaker 11s that Everton will put out can still be effective and can still be impressive in an area that has struggled for so long against a side that I do think they might struggle a bit more Fulham this season, and obviously they hadn't made the changes that they made later on in the game when Everton were enjoying their dominance. But for Everton to do that against a mid-table Premier League side from last season, I think that shows that the template works. It shows that what Dyche is doing at Finch Farm is having an impact and that progress is being made with this group of players. We know that for all that work still needs to be done in the transfer window, we do know that some of the answers to the issues that Everton had on Saturday do lie within the squad. Dominic Calvert-Lewin coming back to fitness, Arnaud Danjuma growing into fitness, Dwight McNeil coming back to fitness, Mikalenko coming back to fitness. I'm not saying he'd necessarily start, but he does give you more options with what you can do with Ashley Young. Youssef Chamiti growing into as the Premier League as a player. So when you think that 11 or that squad will be furnished with players that already exist within the squad and improve as a result of that, and hopefully further additions from the transfer window, then you can see that Everton do have a competitive side this season. They have a side that can create chances. They've got to cross that bridge and score them. They've also got to cross the bridge of being more competitive or being able to be dominant in the second phase and third phases of games now as they go on for longer and longer. But I do think that it shows that whatever Sean Dyche is working on at Finch Farm, it's working on for that whole group of players, not just a case of when you add in the magic that's going to come back to full fitness.
Yeah, kind of what did you enjoy the most?
Yeah, I thought it was creating chances more because one of my concerns from pre-season, maybe not so much from the sporting game, but going into the sporting game was how Everton were going to score a goal. Because a lot of what we'd seen pre-season, Everton looked fit or sharp, but they didn't look like they'd maybe worked on much in the attacking third of how they actually create a chance to score a goal. Because obviously, the lack of goals last year was worrying, but also how many chances they didn't create many chances. No. You think of even the Bournemouth game on the last day, they scored a goal to nothing essentially. They didn't create many clear good chances. But I thought that 45 minutes, busted any kinds of concerns for how Everton are going to score a goal because they carved open Fulham at will. And I think that was most pleasing, that they clearly do have a way and a pattern of play and a blueprint in which they will look to attack teams and get at them this season. And like Joe says, if they can start taking them chances, then they're on to win more games than they'll lose this season. So the big thing was for me was the creating chances, because we haven't seen Everton create that many chances for a long time. And like I say, the worry for me was going into from pre-season was, Everton didn't look like they'd worked on much in the final third in terms of fluid play and passage phases of play and stuff like that. But on Saturday they certainly carved open Fulham, and they've got in various ways. But obviously, some set pieces, balls into the box. I think Amadou Onana was outstanding for 2 of them. We winning back the ball and 2 great passes. And he's someone who seems to be growing in stature in recent weeks as well. And I just thought there was enough there to suggest that if Everton can start scoring goals, and I know it's a big if because we've been talking about it for so long, they will certainly be in more chance of winning more games than they'll lose this season.
Yeah, well, we're up and running at least. It's been the Royal Blue podcast, and we'll be back with you later in the week to preview the trip to Aston Villa.